review of the MCAT. And so the MCAT kind of consists of 4 different sections: chemical and physical foundations of biological systems. So that is going to include your Gen Chem, your physics, organic chem, and then there will be also like a sprinkling of some biochem and biology. It's just important to remember that although like you have chemical and physical foundations, everything through the MCAT is going to kind of be a smattering sometimes of a bunch of different topics, but there will be like main focuses in each of the sections. So that's the first section. The second section is critical analysis and reasoning skills, which is called CARS for short. And this is just your reading comprehension, humanities, and social science passages. So it's kind of like a reading comprehension. You're going to read a passage and answer some questions on it. And a lot of this isn't necessarily like background knowledge. It's just being able to dissect, read, and understand a passage and answer some questions about it. The next section is biological and biochemical foundations of living systems. So this is going to be like your main biology, biochem, and then again, like a sprinkling of some of those other sciences, but like your basic biochem. And then the last section is psychological, social, and biological foundations of behavior. So a lot of that is psychology, some sociology, there's some like research design kind of stuff, and maybe some like psychology statistics, and then again a little bit of sprinkling of like bio in that as well. Just some tips on kind of going about this, because as you guys can see, this is like a 6 to 7.5 hour test, and that just all depends on how quickly you finish each section, how many breaks you want to take, and how you move through the test at your own pace. So the content isn't necessarily the hardest part. I think the hardest part is like the stamina of working through a 6 to 7.5 hour test, because that's a long time. And so they really design it to look and see if you can handle the rigorous pace of being in medical school. And that's like one of the main purposes. So as much content as there is, it's also really important to focus on, this is a long test, and we'll talk a little bit about studying strategies, but that's where taking some full length tests and getting an understanding of what it feels like is really important. And then just reminder that every section is really important. Every section matters. So make sure to look at those evenly, at least at the start, and then, work on getting the ones that you might be a little bit lower in up to, a better level. Because schools won't overlook any specific section. It's kind of a holistic test that they're all looking at, and everything counts. So just kind of going off on this overview, each section has a max score of 132, and that adds up to a total score of 528. And this is just based off of like a full standard bell curve is kind of how they've designed the test, and the 50th percentile will be right around in that like 500 501 range. So when you're prepping for your test, a good tip is to look at the MSAR. So I can't exactly remember what that acronym for, but it's the AAMC's page that has all the statistics and all the information on different medical schools. And so going through that, you can see on the right side of your screen here, a school's specific like score, their median score, their score range. And that's kind of a good way to snuff out how well, like the goal that you need to set for your MCAT, to just look at kind of the average of the accepted students at any school that you might want to go to.
Yeah, I forgot that the internship I did in high school, they're having this program where they...
All right, is everyone all good? Is there any questions on that? Okay. So moving forward, so average scores for 2022 to 2023, we have just for the total like MCAT for an applicant, 506 is the average score for applicants, so just a little bit above the 50th percentile. And then a matriculant, so someone who has been accepted into a medical school, that average was 511.9. And then on the right here, you can see the GPAs as well. Just looking at a little bit of the stats, kind of to get your heads wrapped around, what the average is for some medical schools. And I think when you look at these are averages. So when applying to medical school, a lot of admissions committees look at you very holistically. So, 511 might be the average, but there are plenty of people that are below that, and there are plenty of people that are above that. So I wouldn't take these numbers to heart, and I wouldn't let that, keep you from applying to a school, because schools look at applicants very holistically. So I wouldn't let that deter you from doing anything, but these are the averages from this past year. So a little bit moving on until the timeline of registration. So the dates for the test are offered from January to September. Cost is about $330. There is a fee assistance program, and in this PowerPoint that Lauren will be sending out to the whole group, you can hit that link, and there's a little bit more information about that, just depending on the feasibility and different people's kind of financial ability for the test. It's super important to sign up months ahead of time, because this whole process is really important for medical school and for the application process, as well as just finding that date and then being able to have ample time to prepare, to work through the study process, and also just like prepare for that day, because it is a big day. And then just a little note, 10 days prior to the exam is the last day that you can schedule exam. I'm not sure how it has been recently, but when I took my exam, it was during COVID. So it was a little bit different with scheduling, but I know a lot of the test slots also kind of filled up. So this is also another reason why signing up a month ahead of time is a good idea. And then just based on when one might want to take it, it's best to do it early in the year. I personally took my test in June, but that was because I was taking another gap year, and I knew that I had a whole another year for my test score to come out and everything like that. So the best time is usually earlier in the year, sometime in winter and spring. And I think that gives you the opportunity to take the test, to see your score after about 30 days, and we'll talk about how that score comes out. But then, if it's a score that might not meet your standard or might not be what you were planning on, you have that opportunity to take the test again. So ideally, kind of early in the year. And then just another good point is, because it's such a process and it's such a big test, if you aren't ready, there's options to postpone, but our general advice is just don't take it if you're not ready, because it is such a process and it's a tough day. So I think making sure that you're really ready is a very, very important thing. Also, any of us who has any anyone from PreMD, if you guys have any anecdotes that you want to share, just jump in at any time. I'll leave like a second after any slides. So here's just a question example, which is passage based. So when you're going through the test in the 3 different science sections, so that first, third, and fourth section of the test, the majority of the questions are passage based. So you'll have 10 passages with around 4 to 7 questions each. And so you'll read the passage and then have those questions off to the side. Some of the questions are very passage based. So you can, you have to kind of read and understand the passage. And then some of the questions will just ask a kind of basic concept question that has to do with the passage as well. So that's kind of one of the types of questions and that will be asked on the science sections. And then other than those 10 passages, there are also 15 standalone questions in each section. So this is one example of that, which is just a straight up multiple choice, kind of you either know it or you don't type of question that will be asked. And there's 15 of those per science section as well. I'm not sure, I don't think we have a question example from CARS, but I'll talk through that just real quick. So you'll have a passage, gosh, they have so many different topics that they ask it off, like history, literature, just a bunch of different things. And then they ask, I think, around 7 questions on that as well. And those are all passage based. So all of the answers that you will need can either be found or be deduced from reading the passage. All right, so this is like a really important slide to me, and I think I want to just preface it with, I made the decision just to study on my own. I used a program called MCAT Self-Prep, so I gave me a little bit of structure, but I studied on my own, and I studied for about like 6 months, and then my test was canceled for COVID, so I had an extra 3 months that allowed me to study. So that was my study approach, and everyone really can find what works best for them. So I just want to preface that because I don't think that there's any one way of doing anything, and I don't want this slide to kind of push anyone in any specific direction. These are just opportunities and resources, and finding what works best for you based on how you study, the cost, is really what I think is most important. So I guess just to start off, there are practice exams and practice questions, which personally I think were some of the most helpful things for me. You can get free exams through Kaplan, AAMC, and Princeton Review. I think you usually can get one free test through those. And then the AAMC also has question banks and practice exams. And you can buy certain packages that start out at about $35 an exam. For me, I bought their like full package. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it consisted of multiple different question banks, and then I want to say like 4 practice exams. I can't remember, and I don't know if it's changed since then. But those are really, really valuable because the AAMC are the people who write the test. So being able to have those questions, that is a really, really great way to gauge where you're at and gauge your score before going in and taking a test. The next section, you can do paid online courses. So Kaplan, Princeton Review, Jack Weston, those all have specific courses that you can take that range, that have various prices, but that just depends on the length, the duration, the style of course. But most of those are starting around like $2,000, $1,500 range. There's a lot of high yield content that comes out of those courses. There's a lot of support that they offer, and they're very organized if you need that structure. They also give you plenty of access to a lot of practice exams and practice questions and question banks like we discussed before. The cons, they are pretty expensive, and sometimes they just don't fit everyone's needs. So, if you don't need that organization in that structure and you work better kind of self-studying or studying with friends, then you can go that route as well. But those are some good resources that there are. Some free online resources. The main one I would say is Khan Academy. I definitely used that a lot when there was a concept that I was struggling with. So they are really great. And then if you go through some of the different study resources, like we talked about, Kaplan, Princeton Review, they also have some free questions and some free tests as well. And then lastly, using study books. These often also include some practice exams. I bought the Kaplan set of study books. I think it was around like $350, maybe $500. I can't exactly remember. Here it says $270, but that also came with, I think, 3 or 4 practice exams, which were really valuable as well. And if you like studying out of books, highlighting, if you kind of learn better reading, this is a really good route to go, and a really great resource. Continuing on some study approaches, people can use flashcards, Anki, Quizlet. I feel like most people have used like paper flashcards before and then use Quizlet. Anki, I actually didn't know until I got into medical school. It's like a flashcard program that works on spaced repetition to help you kind of throughout your studying process, like concepts that you've already gone over will come back up, and that's a really good way to learn and retain information. Princeton Review has free flashcard deck. Kaplan, again, you can purchase their flashcard deck on Amazon. And then also check MCAT Reddit and Google, because a lot of people, especially with Anki or Quizlet, have made pre-made decks that you can gain access to. So this is a really good way. I used Quizlet a lot when I was studying, and it was actually really helpful. I had it on my phone, so when I was tired of sitting at a table studying, I'd go for a walk and just flash through some flashcards. And then a couple last things, podcasts are really nice. So the MCAT podcast can give you some basic information and run-throughs on some high yield topics, as well as being able to give you some kind of advice and walking through different questions and how to approach things. There's paid tutoring as well, and then kind of just going and finding some friends to study with, which I know I had a lot of friends in medical school who did that and kind of worked together. And it's also great to have someone with you who kind of understands what you're going through, because the MCAT studying is not always the most fun. Just a few pearls of wisdom from the group here that kind of everyone contributed to. Going into it, decide a goal for your score. So a lot of people will take a practice test early, the second point, to kind of gauge where they're at and see how much studying, how much time they're going to need to put into working on getting that score that they set for themselves. So I think that this is really important. And just know that that practice test that might be early, it might not go as well as you thought it did. I know that it didn't do that for me, and it was a shot a little bit, but it kind of just gives you a gauge of where you're at. And I don't know, gave me like a little kick in the pants to get studying and get going. When doing full length practice exams, do them in one sitting. This is so important. Like I said in the beginning, the big part of this test is stamina and being able to go through it. So being able to do this practice test in one sitting is really important. We kind of talk about going through and pretending that it's like the test day. So getting up early, making breakfast, if you're going to eat breakfast, going through all those motions as if it were a real thing, taking the same amount of breaks, the same time, and kind of creating a schedule and a routine, because on the day of the test, there's so many things that you might not be able to control. So just having that routine is really important. I took, I think, like 11 practice tests, and I tried to do this every time. So when I went in for the real test, it kind of felt just like another practice test. After taking these practice tests, it's so important to review your practice exams, not just the questions you got wrong either. I know that that's kind of like, oh, I got that right. Simple. I knew it. Let's move on. There were plenty of times when I thought I knew what I was answering, and I thought that I knew the right answer and why it was the right answer, but I didn't. So going through, it was just like a lucky guess. Going through, looking at those right answers too, and understanding the concepts is just as important as going through and looking at the wrong answers as well. Make a study plan and stick to it. This is really difficult for me. In undergrad, I didn't have the most discipline, so deciding to do the MCAT self-prep stuff and work it on my own instead of doing one of the Kaplan or Princeton review programs was a big stretch for me. So I made an Excel document, I made a schedule, I kind of planned it all out. And I would say I stuck to it for the most part. There were definitely times when I got a little bit behind and had to work a little bit harder the next week. But this is really important to kind of just stay on track because it is a lot of information. That being said, take time for yourself. Like I said, when you're tired of sitting at a desk and studying for a couple hours a day, go take a walk, go do whatever you need to do, go get outside, go hang out with friends, because that's really, really important. I know that there were some times in the middle of my studying where I really needed to take a couple days off because I was getting pretty burnt out, and I did, and that really helped because it's a long process, and making sure that you're healthy and you have that self-care and you're not burning out is going to be really, I think, a positive part of studying, and will actually have a more positive impact on your score as well. Last little thing is drive to the test site beforehand. Know where you're going because it's going to be early in the morning, like I said, and you want to kind of control all the things that you can control. So know where to go, find some parking, figure out where you need to go in. If there's going to be traffic on that day, figure out how long it takes. Do it on the same day of the week. So like my test was on a Saturday. I went on a Saturday morning, kind of at the same time that I was actually going to go. And yeah, that just helps with the routine. And then your MCAT score lasts remains valid for 2 to 4 years. I'm not sure what that range depends on, but I think it kind of depends on the admissions committees for some schools as well. And then we'll kind of open it up to some of the other PreMD people to give some personal anecdotes on how they studied.
Hi, everyone. I can go first. Thanks so much, Brendan, for being our host for this presentation. I just have 3 things that I wish I would have known about or maybe just listened to myself whenever I was studying. So my MCAT experience, I ended up needing to take it 3 times. And if I could prevent any of you from taking it multiple times, then I would feel like I was successful being in this PreMD interest group. So my first thing, I've mentioned it on another one too, is that, and Brendan has mentioned it, that there are no miracles that will happen on the MCAT for you. If you do not see your goal score, the score that you want, a score that you're going to be proud of to apply with, if you don't see that score on your practice exams, it is not going to show up once you go to the testing site and take it. And like, I just could not get that through my head. And so I definitely was not ready for my first 2 tests. And I just wish that I would have heard that. So if you're not seeing a score that you want, then you're not ready to take that test. And that's why you can postpone it and you can reschedule it, and they keep that open for you. My next thing, something that I didn't really realize, was that not only are these test prep companies or whatever you're using to study, they're helping you learn the content, but I think a big part of it is that they're teaching you these test taking strategies, which I did not realize. And I still use a lot of these in med school now. But like, for example, one of them was, and I used Altius, which is like a smaller one out of Utah. They taught us you read the question stem, you reword it in your own words to make sure you understand it, because the first part of a question is understanding what they're asking. So then I would use that reworded question stem that I made myself, and I would repeat it to myself before every answer choice. And it just helped me with making sure I was choosing, I knew what they were asking. Then I felt confident in the answer choice that I landed on. And I think that it made my speed really get faster, because I wasn't going back up to that question stem and like rereading it over and over. So they really teach you test taking strategies, which I think is something to learn not only for the MCAT, but I have appreciated it in med school as well. And then The last big point is be honest with yourself when you're kind of choosing the way you're going to study. So my first MCAT, I chose more of a self-paced, and I knew that that doesn't work for me. It still doesn't work for me today. So I didn't follow it. I needed something that held me more accountable. So for my third and final test, I chose to up the price tag and get a personal tutor so that like they were assigned to me. And then I had somebody that was asking me like, oh, did you go through your psych, whatever? Did you take your practice test? What did you get? And just having that, someone holding me accountable was something that I knew that I needed from the start, but I was just pushing it off because I was so worried about the cost. So just like know yourself, you know how you study, and that's how you need to choose your test prep if you choose to use one. And then a fun little thing that I read somewhere was that so you go and take the test and you get breaks in between each section. And that break between your third and then your fourth and final section, they said to like bring like a fun treat. So like if you wanted like a candy or like a cupcake or just like something to get you like amped up, your little bit of energy left to get you through that last section. So I brought some type of candy, and it was just like something small to look forward to. And I think it just helped like keep up morale as a whole. And that's all for me. Thanks.
I just kind of have one like tip that I think is like an important thing that really helped me. And it's like, don't be afraid to push back applying if you don't feel ready. I took 3 gap years and I originally only planned to take 1. And then I just like at every point I got close to taking the MCAT, I just realized like, I don't think I'm ready. I'm going to push it back. I'm going to study. I'm going to change my strategy. And that was like a very hard thing to do, especially like there was a question about like not comparing yourself to others, like seeing people I went to school with who were like going straight in or who had already taken the MCAT and they had gotten into med school. And I was like, oh my God, like, why am I pushing it back? But I think in the long run, like I only had to take the MCAT once. I was really happy with my score. And it was just like a matter of like knowing where I was in my like process of how well I thought I would do on it. So like, don't be afraid to change like the timeline. Something that a friend told me was that like med school is like literally always going to be here. Like it doesn't matter if you take it 1 year or if you go and have a career and come back 15 years later, like it'll always be here. So like do it when it's going to be best for you. And I had a full-time job when I studied for the MCAT, and like that was really stressful, but like I think it wasn't until like I was 3 years or like 2 years out where I was like, okay, I'm in the mindset to really focus and do like the absolute best that I think I can do on it. And so just kind of like be honest with yourself and just be like real with your expectations and just like your time and your commitments. But yeah.
I think I'll echo what most people said in that just being honest with yourself is very important and not rushing the exam. Miracle isn't going to happen on test day. And so don't be afraid to push it back. Even if you've scheduled it, don't say like, I'm just going to sit and see what I get. I think it's important to just try to take it once. You may have to take it more than once, but I really valued the approach of like trying to be cost effective, just given my financial situation when I was applying. And so a lot of people may have taken Kaplan courses and Princeton review courses. I don't think that they're all too great myself personally. Not having done one, I can't speak specifically on them, but I think the best approach would be trying to buy a used set of the Kaplan or the Princeton review books that are recent and up to date. You can find them online pretty easily. And then if you are going to spend money, spending it on UWorld, which is going to be a great database questions that you can work through and try to do all of them. I think they'll really expose you to the different types of questions that you'll see on test day, and you'll be able to apply the knowledge that you're trying to learn. It's not necessarily a content exam. It's more of the application of your understanding of that information. And so just wish you all the best of luck.
Awesome.
Can I pop on really quick? Just
Go
because
for
somebody
it.
mentioned, I think it was Taylor who mentioned it in the chat, that she was thinking about taking a gap year and like studying for the MCAT as like a full-time job. That is kind of sort of more or less what I did. I was actually back in school because I'm non-traditional So I was like part-time student. All of my classes were stuff that was on the MCAT. I was tutoring in a subject that was on the MCAT. And then when I was not in school or going to the gym, because self-care, I was studying for the MCAT. It is worth taking the time to do it right, whatever that looks like for you could be different. I'm kind of in the same boat as Morgan, where like I needed somebody to kind of like babysit me a little bit and like really push me to get stuff done, and hold me accountable, because I tried the self-study. I was originally going to apply a year before I ended up actually applying, and I kicked my application, the whole thing, down the road, because I knew that in 1 month, which was what I had left before my MCAT date, I couldn't pull my score up the number of points that I was going to need to even have like a snowball's chance in hell. And I sobbed for a solid 24 hours because it just felt like my dream was falling apart. And I'd gotten so close. This is like coming into May, I think. I was gutted. It is worth taking the time. Your application literally only gets better as you take time out of school, as long as you're not like sitting around doing nothing. Because odds are good the time you're going to fill, like outside of studying for the MCAT and all those other things, you're going to do things that interest you and that excite you and that you're passionate about and that are helpful in your pursuit of medicine, whether you realize it or not. So I'm a big, big fan of taking the year, even though it can be a really hard pill to swallow.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing those personal anecdotes. I think that just really illustrates how everyone has a little bit of a different approach and how important it is to kind of just find out what works for you. Because there's 1,001 ways to do the MCAT, and none of them are necessarily better than any of the others. So finding what works best for you, I think, is really, really important. So yeah, thank you guys for sharing so much. So kind of getting back into some of the more nitty-gritty details. After you take the MCAT, scoring takes about a month, so like 30 to 35 days to get back to you. This is not necessarily a fun time, but that's kind of the way it is. So when you're done taking it, I was just kind of like, okay, we're done. It's done. You did it. You kind of forget about it for a little bit. It definitely creeps up and you think about it, but just be patient. Scores will come. And I think that's another important thing of why we take it early is once you get that score, if it's something that you weren't exactly looking for, if you didn't meet your goal, thinking about retaking or moving in a different direction on studying is something that's really important as well. So the MCAS will, so when you get into May and June, going through the AMCAS, so the actual application service, and this is for AAMC as well, the DO application, they will process your application without a score. So if you say take your MCAT in May and you want to put your AMCAS in the end of May, early June, they will process, and then you can get verification of your application, and then your score will automatically be added to that application because it's all within the AAMC. So you can submit an AMCAS application and an AAMC application before your score is provided to you. Yeah, and I guess that kind of explains that tip that you see on the right side of the screen there. If you're waiting on your score, you can just apply to one school to get verification of your whole entire application, because it can take 8 weeks, up to 8 weeks at during some of the busy times earlier in the summer. So we kind of talked about this a good amount on retaking the MCAT. So when thinking about it, we're just gonna like kind of evaluate how you feel. So like ask why, is your score adequate? Because it technically can be risky, because schools will see both of your scores, or at least they'll see that you have taken the MCAT more than one time. So just consider the pros and cons while taking it again. And, do you have ample time to study? What are the costs going to be? Will you do better? Are you going to put that work in to kind of improve? And we talked a little bit about, do we have another year to apply? I actually did that. So I was going to apply 1 year, and my advisor said, you should probably wait another year, because I don't think that you're going to get into the schools that you want to get into. And that was tough to hear, but it was the best advice that anyone really gave me throughout the process. So I think those are a lot of things to consider when retaking the MCAT. But it's also really, really important to know is that you're not just your MCAT score. Schools look at people very holistically. So that, talks about your GPA, your scores, your, the courses that you took in an undergrad, but it's way more than that. It's your experiences, your personal statement, your activity statements that you fill out in the AMCAS, and then like so much more. So, some schools will look at the MCAT a little bit more weighted, but most schools nowadays are looking at a very holistic review of their applicants. And like Olivia mentioned before, the more time that you take out of school, if you're doing, things that are really important to you, that only makes your application look better in a lot of eyes of the admissions committees, because, you're doing things that you love, and you're showing your passion for those things. So yeah, you're not just your MCAT score. So just remember that. And just don't be scared to retake it, because there's a plenty people that I've met in this group as well who have retaken it. It shows med schools that you're really serious about being in med school, that you really want it, and that you're willing to put the work in to retake it and to kind of improve and do better. So I don't think that this is something that you should stray away from, but it definitely is something that you want to weigh the pros and cons. Last but not least, I just want to talk about some take-home points. So there was a lot of things that were discussed today, and kind of like we just talked about in the end, your MCAT score isn't the only thing that determines your acceptance. So if you have an MCAT score that might be on the lower side or below the median of a school that you want to apply to, don't fear applying to that school, because they look at you holistically. And I think that's really, really important to remember that. The second thing is there's no one way of studying. Like I said, there's 1,001 ways, and no way is better than the other. Just find something that works to you, make a schedule, stick to it, really get after it and work hard, because that will definitely pay off. This is a little more information on the MCAT fee assistance program. So you can apply up to 5 times in a lifetime, but just once per calendar year. So this is going to be a whole program that helps with kind of a whole host of things for the AAMC. So some prep products for the MCAT, the registration fee is going to be reduced. The MSAR, like we talked about earlier, that system that kind of gives you a lot of information on all of the different medical schools will be included. Some application fees and a lot of different things like that. So just making the MCAT and the application process a little bit more cheaper for people, and affordable for people who cannot or don't have like necessarily the means at that point. So that's definitely something to look into if you are available. And some of the documents that you're going to need, so you're going to need you and your parents' income. So this is some of like those tax forms, W-2s, 1099s. If you are over 26, if you are 26 or over, you don't need your parental financial information. There's a consent and certification form. Then there's also some financial aid award letters and cost of attendance information. And they also might ask for some supporting like additional documents. And the website has a lot of listed resources in that section as well. So definitely something to look into. Definitely helps with making the process, which is so expensive a lot of the times, into something more affordable. Here are some resources that we used. This is great stuff that you guys will all have available to you. I think Lauren emailed out this PowerPoint. So kind of just looking through this, yeah, a lot of great stuff in here. And then here is the exit survey. So if you guys could take another quick minute or two to fill this out. And then afterwards, we will have some times to do some breakout rooms and ask some questions to all of us here. And Lauren just put the link in the chat as well. So if you guys need the link in the chat, especially being able to work with that one-on-one tutor. And I think that's it. If there's any burning questions right now, we can kind of go over those. If not, we can jump in some small group breakout rooms and we can ask some questions in a little bit of smaller groups. Because I know, like me, some people don't like asking questions in big rooms on Zoom.
I second that. I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms. There should be about 2 med students in each of them. If you don't get a notification that you're going to go into a breakout room, you're just going to stay in the main room with a couple other med students. And then, yeah, feel free to ask anything you guys want.
I have a question for Jacob. I was wondering if I could go in his room, if possible.
Spencer, is that possible?
If
Yeah,
not, I could ask you guys too. It was just something he said that I was curious about.
Make it happen.
Oh, cool. Hey, Jacob. I was curious because I when you said you did 3 gap years, I hadn't heard of that before, and I was intrigued. But I like the flexibility you talked about in terms of like do it when you're ready. But the thing I was curious about was if you do that like beyond a year, because I've heard of a year, if it can be precarious with admissions committees, like when you're writing essays or doing interviews to explain it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Or if that's not even necessary, if it's like, no, like it doesn't matter as long as like you've got a good resume going during that.
Yeah, I would say it was a little different just because like the last year was like the COVID year. So like the questions kind of changed in regard to like, what were you doing this last year? Because I knew that like everybody wasn't doing much because of COVID. But as far as like a lot of secondaries, you know, once you get to that point and you've received the secondaries, they'll say like, you know, when did you graduate? And if you've been out of school, like, tell us what you've been doing since then. And so you get the chance to like explain what you've been doing. Kind of what I think Olivia was mentioning, like the biggest thing is just like, don't take 3 years off and have like nothing to show for it. Just make sure that you're doing something during that time. For me, I didn't do like a crazy amount during my gap year because also part